And we're live. Welcome to you, the viewer. Welcome to our fantastic panel. It's the After Dram, and that means it is time to unwind. So put your feet up, grab a dram or two, and relax. And as a quick recap to our early afternoon, Dave, Sheila, Kent, and I have done a deep dive into the final. What?
What's my name?
Sheila's not here, man.
Did I say Sheila again? I did not. Oh, that's horrible.
And it's live and it's recorded. We can prove it.
Okay, we will prove it. And I'll prove you right, probably. But I'm done. I'm going to recap anyways. As a quick recap, Cheryl, Kent, Dave, and I have done a deep dive into the last third of A Glass Apart Irish Single Pot Still Whiskey, this book right here, with the author right there beside us. And as always, it was fun. It was educational. And it is the last time we're going to spend an hour online with Fionnan talking about this book. Maybe other books in the future, which I'm hoping he writes after his PhD. But this will be it for just a little while. So it's sad, but it was fun. So we put that together. It evens out. We're okay. We're all good? So, question one. So, this is the first part. About 2/3 point into the book is where we are. And I got the sense of woe about the decline of pot still whiskey as you reminisced over what it was, how magnificent it was at one point. And here's a quote: "After nearly a century of struggle and decline, Irish whiskey is on the make. More specifically, it's on the new make. 4 years ago, there were only 4 distilleries in Ireland. If the new offerings continue at even a fourth the current rate for years from now, this book may need updating." So does it need update? It does need updating. There's a whole bunch of them.
It's out of date at this point. Yeah.
You are obviously hopeful of the return to its previous splendor, the glory that it once been. But did you believe it would happen when you were writing this? So you're saying, I hope this happens, but did you believe it was actually going to happen as you're penning that and being productive?
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain amount of wishful thinking. I remember, even when Dingle and Teeling and Ecklerville and a lot of the early ones had set up, there was this idea that, wow, we have come so far. This is incredible. I remember the Irish Whiskey Society forum when there was talk of Dingle, and then there was talk of building 2 distilleries in Dingle. One of them never panned out. And they were saying, oh wow, there might even be 2. Distilleries are like buses. You wait years and then you get 2 of them in Dingle. And of course, I'm stillborn. But it turned out there was a flood of them coming up. Now there's about 40. And now it would be a question of how many will survive, or at what rate we hit the peak, or if there is a peak, or anything in between. So there's almost more. I was almost more confident then that the number would continue to grow than I am now about what happens. Will it double from 40? Will it halve? I honestly don't know. I don't know enough about economics for starters. So yeah, there's certainly a thrill at the moment, and an anxiety, a nervousness, an excitement that wasn't there. There was certainly a degree of a kind of a confidence emerging back when that book came out. And that would have been, again, it came out 2015, and a lot of it was written in 2013 and 14. So, even then there was a mood emerging. But now, yeah, it's a world away.
And I think I know the answer to this, but what do you believe now? So many distilleries opening up. Are they distinct enough? And I'm leading you into the article, obviously, with that, and especially with Kilween, and I'm going to say Kilween and others, because what you described in Kilween really struck me. What they were doing seemed really cool. But are there others that are going to bring you back to the glory that you once had, or are you surpassing it? Are the mash bills that you're doing now just as well? You're replicating them, but are they becoming more unique than what was in the past?
I'll put it this way. The idea of any distillery making more than one mash is already a modern thing. In the past, the mashes were not quite as consistent because again, they're dealing with sacks. They kind of varied, so again, industrialization channeled that, but the idea of like people using 35% this or that, it's kind of what you have on the day, but you have a kind of a rough style house cookbook, as it were, so things have gotten more precise for one thing, and people have become much more ambidextrous, at the same time. And so that's very modern, the idea of somebody playing around. It's not that, I mean, you look at Scotland, you look at the number of beloved distilleries that make one thing and one thing only. And then it was a big deal when, like, Brook Laddie started making peated and unpeated and super peated and doing, whatever, but for years, Clynelish is Clynelish is Clynelish, and if you know Clynelish, you know what Clynelish is supposed to taste like, again, so I think Irish whiskey, because a lot of that was lost, it was very easy to adapt, like Teeling Distillery were doing that from birth, I think a lot of, now at the same time, one of the things that's talked about in that article is the original boom, and there was certainly a degree of cynicism around, and I think deserved cynicism around a lot of what was coming out when Irish whiskey first exploded, because a lot of it was really the same thing. It was Cooley in a bourbon barrel with a funny name and somebody's branding idea, and then usually stuff that was either legally disingenuous or outright not true. And a lot of, there was a lot to be, you'd walk through the airport and you just see loads of what they were calling Cooley clones. And then you had the second wave, which was stick Cooley in something to make it different. And some of those are fantastic, and some of them are gimmicky, and everything in between, and some of them are duds, and there's certainly an element of that. And then now we're at a stage where you have the Cooley stuff, but you also have great Northern and West Cork distillers who have been selling stuff into the bloodstream. And some people have managed to get Bushmill stock, which wasn't really available before. So it's gotten more diverse, certainly. But I think the big flood is when stuff comes out. Now, my big fear was not that everyone was reselling Cooley, certain boredom. But my big fear was that we'd end up with an island of Coolies by mistake, because everyone would sell it and then make product that would be identical to what they were telling people was theirs. And so, the bloodstream would come up like that, and we'd end up with just homogeneity by accident. And there was a lot of salesmanship at the start. I think, a lot of stuff that said like triple distilled, single malt, idyllic looking location, and that was enough, this weird mix of kind of like Scotland sales pitch, artisanship, a notion that triple distilled was Irish, that single malt was premium, and this and that. And I used to look at the landscape and be able to pick out on five fingers, Yeah, exactly. In some sort of like, gang sign, how many distilleries were doing stuff that I genuinely thought was interesting. And up until relatively recently, if I was to talk about people I was fanatically interested in, it's still quite small. And there are people who have turned heads, and it's and they deserve commendation for that. They deserve to be singled out, because the hard truth is not everyone is making product that's as good as everyone else's, and certainly not as exciting as everyone else's, and it's not my job to be anybody's marketing department. It's when I put out a book, now that book, to be honest with the reader, and that should be my confer ultimately, and anyone writing about spirits, really, it's for the benefit of otherwise you're just unpaid branding. Anyway, now looking about in the last year, really, I'm seeing more and more people who have copped it, who have gotten that in the white noise of Irish whiskey, it's not enough to say, well, we're super small and special and we really care, and maybe you're super small and special and you really care. And it'd be all the more shame, to see them disappear. But it is, and at the same time, do it without gimmicks, because I don't think a lot of the gimmicks fly. I don't think, we kind of, in this attempt to make Cooley proprietary, ended up with a lot of really weird casks, which, Ireland, suddenly there was a kind of it's as much a part of Irish whiskey now as pot still is, certainly, although it's completely new. The idea of just Ireland being this place where you see this wild west of every other cask under the sun, and some of them are really hokey, and some of them are not very good, and some of them are fantastic, and everything in between. But there's a certain cynicism around, and a lot of lazy thinking that would really grind me to the bones when I hear people talk about casks, especially people who haven't distilled it, and they'll say, "Oh, all the flavor comes from the wood anyway." And so we found a connection for some French wine casks and put this in there, and we've done all the. You have to piss off. And it's much harder to move away from a USP, as it were, and say, well, and you could even say like, "Oh, well, we've played with the yeast, and that that makes our whiskey different." And that's, to me, is much cooler, much more innovative than just being the millionth person. Yeah. But at the same time, I think there's a line in there. John Wilcox down at Blackwater says, we've moved past. Where's it? I think you sent it to me as one of the quotes you wanted to talk about. Anyway, he says we need to get our fingers in the dirt. And that really struck with me, that the idea of moving beyond, well, we're different because we use a lot of rye, or we're different because we use funny yeast, or we're different because we use this cask, and trying to compose things and be different and be exploratory with a degree of productional sincerity and detail. And I think that those are the people I'm interested in, is that crowd, and I think there's at least twice as many of them as I would have said if we'd done this a year ago, and it's still not big. And I there aren't that many people covered in that article that I sent you. Who's in there? Ecklerville, Killowen, Blackwater, and
there's 5.
Waterford, and who am I unjustly leaving out? Somebody's unfairly being left out. Anyway, Swan, PhD. Yeah, of course. The me and Mihal. So yeah, that there's a brief allusion to the thesis stuff there, but anyway, that kind of exploratory impulse, I think, is what will really kind of pull people from the herd, and I think the ones who are smart have started to sit up and pay attention and listen, and then there's a few that were always intending to do this, but we're just slow off getting off the ground, and anything in between. But yeah, it's certainly gotten much more exciting for people like yourselves, I think, recently, and we're hearing a lot. Well, you still hear all the familiar gibberish about like it's special because it's Irish and look no further and blah blah blah.
I'm going to ask you this question in a second, so I'm putting up this question for you to respond, but I want to ask one to the panel first, so that'll come up. But panel, so Fionnan had a quote in the book. So we're still at the very end of the book. We're finishing off the book, going into the article right away. This is the last one, which points to everyone's role in Irish whiskey continuance. And his quote is, and I had it before, demand quality in return for our patronage and keep the appreciation free from marketing ploys. And you referred back to that, and not just marketing, not just the wine cask, but something other. And there's another great quote in the article relating to this. But panel, I want to go back to you, because this is from, let's say, 6 years ago. 6 years ago.
Yeah, 6 years. It was 2015. So yeah.
So, do you feel like Dingle, Dublin Whiskey Company, Teeling, Tullamore Dew, that Finn refers to in his closing chapters, fits this bill? That they're giving us quality stuff that's not related or not hinging on marketing ploys. So what do you think of them, taste-wise? And how do you know that our appreciation is part of the result and not because we're being branded? Because they're telling us what we want to hear. So let's go. Dave?
Well, I think the majority of the public believes what they're being told. And I'm lucky to be in this group of guys and gals. Sorry, Cheryl, I got your name right.
That's a shot.
But and I'm kind of in a unique position because I don't believe anything that's marketed to me. I've got to try it myself. I've got to talk to my friends. I've got to talk to other whiskey people that I trust. And so, yeah, you can put whatever you want on the bottle. You can market it however you want. I'm not giving you my money until I actually get to try it and actually understand what's going on. So I don't know if I've answered the question or not, but that was
you did. And yes, let's just say yes. And we're going over to Cheryl, previously known as Sheila.
Otherwise known as Cheryl.
Yet to be known as who knows what name.
So no, I have to definitely ditto what Dave said. It's hard because you kind of rely a certain amount on that marketing and to know that the product even exists. But I'll walk past it on a shelf if I don't know anything about it. And honestly, like even with Irish whiskeys, any of the ones that we currently now have in our collection, it's like we walked past it before because we didn't know anything about it. We hadn't tried it. We hadn't talked about it. So you're not going to go just grab it and hope that you enjoy it. You need to know more about it. So market it all you want, hype it up all you want. I'm still going to walk past it until I know more about it or have a chance to talk to somebody that knows more about it or shares a sample. So yeah, it's, you can market it till you're blue in the face. I'm still going to walk past it if I don't know anything more about it.
Thank you.
And like this one, a friend of ours who was on the show here a couple weeks ago, Jason, actually brought it over to one of our sit around the fire events. So we were able to taste it prior, and we knew that we liked it. We were actually planning on buying a bottle, and then it just didn't happen.
Yeah.
We have way too many bottles here already. But yeah, when it comes to marketing, we really kind of gloss over the marketing because we know most of it is just frankly BS. Again, triple still, right? It's one of those things, that it's just marketing it. It's better because it's triple. No, it's triple still because you need to get more alcohol out of it because your mash bill is maybe not quite up to snuff, right? But the general, right? And the general public just they seem to buy that because they don't know any better.
Yep.
Well, and for everything.
Yeah.
Well, I've always been told the best story wins.
Yep.
So if you have a better story than everybody, because the general public goes into the store and they're looking at all these bottles on the shelf, and this guy goes, "Man, this was made by Swedish models." Well, yeah, I'll have to have a bottle of that.
Yeah,
because sounds way better than it's just made in a distillery somewhere in X, you name the country. I don't know if anybody knows the German distillery or the German spirits company that their spirits are all poured over the breasts of the models.
Oh my God. Really?
And there's some knuckleheads. Some knuckleheads will buy that.
Yeah.
I'm sure they sold lots, but probably pictures. And maybe if you click the bottom, you'll see the breasts that actually were poured over kind of like the tree.
Numbered like the other.
Yeah. The silhouette of the model, and it's.
I did a seminar, a beer seminar for a bunch of teachers, and this actually came up in the seminar. And I said, who else other than the phys ed teachers would buy this crap? And then all of a sudden the phys ed guys woke up and said, "Hey, what the hell?" But they marketed.
The point of the story, you're trying to be mean to teachers. Is this what you just want to be mean to? It's already a shot about Cheryl, and now a shot about.
No, it was a good group, and I did it for 2 different high schools in Sherwood Park.
Nice. All right, let's go back to this. So 2 comments. So Fionnan, I asked you the question, and I'll put that question up in a second, but let's relate that to this. So, and here's the article name, Unfiltered Muck and Magic. And this was the quote I like. I love it. "We've come and gone past finishing. We've come and gone past Mizunara. We've come and gone past Takaji. Not now. We need to get our fingers in the dirt." And so I love that quote. That was my favorite quote of them all. And I think that was on the 5th page if you're looking through the article. And let's bring that back to this question as well from Keith. Do you think the innovation will continue at the same level? And I'm hoping the same level and same quality that this gentleman is thinking. What do you think, Fionnan?
Yeah, and I mean, again, that quote was said to me in a very loud tone of voice by John Wilcox, who's the distiller down at Blackwater. And I think John also comes, background is in American craft distilling, so they bring a certain. And I think Blackwater and Killowen as well. There's a number of Irish distilleries who are peculiarly cognizant of world whiskey, of the new whiskey we find in Denmark, in Tasmania, in all, because it used to be first you got the first wave again of Scotch being made elsewhere, of single malt, whatever, and then it's only within the last 10 years that it's really become visible that you're getting kind of the Corsair distilleries of the world, and you're getting people who just don't give a damn and are going to smoke something with sheep shit or whatever, Belgrove, where I know quite close to Brendan. And I was having a conversation with John about whiskey in general as well as Irish whiskey, and that quote stuck with me quite strongly, because there is that idea of like the easy USP, the triple distilled for smoothness, unsmoked, but similarly smoked as a I don't think anyone in Ireland really use smoked as a USP. I think it's just drastically undersells what they do. But certainly Connemara was sold as the only Irish peated whiskey. I think we have to move way beyond that stuff. Or we finished it in this barrel. Take a look. It smells and tastes like the thing that was in there before. Now again, I don't mean to diminish it, but there's an awful lot of that crap. And presented as if it's innovation, and actually Dave Broom came up earlier today. I remember hearing Dave say something recently, finishing hasn't been innovative since the 90s. People have been repeating this again and again and again and patting themselves on the back that this is, exciting. Bushmill 16 is a finish, and that's been out for decades, and it's much harder to explain, well, we were mucking about with champagne yeast with this, but we tried it with rye in our mash and it didn't work with that yeast or this or whatever. And the new make was great with this one, but it didn't really age as well as we thought. But then we put in these barrels and the rum barrel plus, that kind of stuff. And I think in an age of expanded visibility, it's much easier to put people on screen, right from the myth of the master distiller as marketing personality. And, when did that happen? The 80s, the 90s, you start to see that it is only increased the customer interest in seeing the person that made it beyond the mark. They want to go to a festival and they want to see, whoever. They want to see Jim McEwen, they want to see Billy Lighton. When you get somebody explaining the technical details behind something with enthusiasm, even if someone has no idea what yeast even is, they get it. It's communicated. It becomes its own marketing. And I think that kind of detail, and it's really coming. You look at what's happened with food and drink, with food as well as drink. Down to level of caricature. People wanting to know what garden their olives were grown in. This kind of stuff. If someone was to present me with a salad and say, well, there's 2 olives in there. One of them is a rare Greek olive from this island, blah, blah, blah. The other is an Italian olive from northern Italy and blah, blah, blah. And wow. And, this is still only 2 olives. But, there is this interest that has erupted in knowing this kind of stuff. People want to be told. And I think in such a space and certainly, the internet has become a sphere, forums were already kicking off in the early 2000s, but they were kind of locked spaces, where you were already interested before you were reading one of these forums, and you were just looking for like-minded souls on the internet,
Whoops.
The myth, I don't want to keep using words like myth, but the aura, let's say, around distilleries like Balcones, translated in American whiskey well ahead of anyone who knew what exactly they were doing, or and again, any number of these successful, Corsair, before anyone, and I think that mystique is very difficult to cultivate. But I think if you build that mystique on BS, it gets punctured very quickly on the internet usually, and it's very difficult to rebuild it. If anyone says, well, they're full of it and this is all fraud, it's much harder to come back from that. And again, you'll wonder, maybe there's plenty of space. Maybe it doesn't matter if you're doing this, and you can just be an artisan little distillery and, you know, have labels with pictures of, I mean, this is a good looking country, you know,
Yep.
maybe you can, you know, and that'll be fine, and maybe that will work. So who knows?
Well, I look at the alternative to your olive story. If you ask the question, the guy goes, "No, it's just a salad made in a factory somewhere. I don't, in some place." Some guys go, "Yeah, that's okay. I'll have
go back
have
to your.
Yeah.
Go ahead."
No,
That
I was just saying, getting back to your best story wins. Someone who's impassioned about something's going to sell. There. Aren't we? And Finn, let's go back. Let's link what you're saying now to another quote you had in Muck and Magic. There's a sense in Ireland of a haunted, slightly nervous industry. So are they still nervous? Are they nervous because there's too much innovation? Is maybe Middleton becoming a little bit, Bushmills a little bit nervous of the little guys now? Where's the nervousness? Was it that they were going to fail, or that it would become nondescript?
I think, well, first of all, I don't think Middleton are nervous about anyone. Middleton, if they've ever had it, so, you know, really the success, you know, you could argue the whole boom is Jemison, you know, and Tullamore Dew, and they often get left out. How, you know, again, there's only one brand really that's in the league of Jemison even, and that's Tullamore, in the sense of like going into markets that no one was in and really taking off, you know, Eastern Europe.
Can you quantify the nervousness for us?
When I said the nervousness, I was really talking about.
I say quantify the nervousness for us, because I really can't picture the nervousness. I don't know where that is.
Okay. I remember talking to a few people about their pot still whiskey as it was maturing. And when it was young, it did not taste like Middleton. And they were worried about this, that they had done something wrong. And as it got older, and then there was the question, and you know, I was thinking, Jesus, I wrote this whole book, and maybe just Middleton tastes a lot like the stuff from the past, but if you repeat this, it doesn't actually do this at all. You know, what an idiot I look like. Because, you know, like, you know, okay, you take these things and you repeat the process, you should get the same thing on the other side, but there was nobody there. So there's not the reassurance of starting another peated malt distillery. So it's like, is this really what we think it is? And that particular distillery, their pot still is now of a certain age, still hasn't come out yet, and it tastes a lot more like kind of oldie green spot than it had when it was like 2 years old. But again, you know, so it's become more recognizable. It's still different, but now you've got people who are trying to be different than Middleton and putting out Serge endorsing the Greek olives. Sergios is the editor for magazine. Fantastic issue of which came out this morning. In no ways a second plug. So they're what looks like a tree. A Swan tree.
Fionnan, I can't read that. Could you read that for me? I can't hear it. What's it say?
I think it says
title of that?
I think it says Welsh Whiskey Magazine. It's a fantastic publication. But where was I going?
I asked you to quantify the nervousness and
nervousness. So and now that people are doing really odd stuff. I mean, I remember with the PhD stuff, you know, Michael Walsh and myself and Matt Healy, just before it was coming out, thinking like, oh God, what's this stuff? Is it going to be all that different? Is it going to be terrible? And I'd had stuff with oats in it before from other places that had turned out, and I knew, but you know, there's still the uncertainty. And as it grows up, you know, who knows what, you know, any of this tastes like as it matures in a bourbon versus a sherry barrel. We've only that whole book is about roughly 60% barley, 40% malt stuff, or that between that and 50-50 was something. You know, those two, you know, even with the spirits that were in there, with the exception of that one little Kilbeggan spirit, you know, that was in there. And the whole imagination of pot still is built around that. And you think, well, how do you? And it was interesting to try the spirits and see what it all still tastes, because I think I know what pot still distillate tastes like, and it still tasted a lot like that. Certainly much more like that than it did like malt whiskey, but just these weird riffs on the theme. And so there's that idea there. There's a whole lot of where does everyone fit in? Where do they find themselves? You know, so the nervousness is not, you know, I think there's a lot of confidence, but the nervousness itself is something, you know, less visible to the consumer, thankfully, you know, and about the space of a distillery, you know, because everybody is new and the map has been just redrawn very, very quickly, you know.
The confidence shows, though. So Blackwater and Bone. Actually, could you talk about Bone? Because that's the beginning of your article. Your work with master distiller Michael Welsh. Thank you.
Walsh.
And so, how you're working with him? Tell us how. Well, relating to your doctorate, what they're doing to progress your doctorate, and maybe how they are working with Killuene and the innovation there, because there's innovation in two ways, and it's not even innovation. It's weird because yours is heritage and their innovation, so it's a dichotomy between heritage and innovation coming together, which I don't know if we've seen. I can't remember seeing it, or I can't pinpoint it in what we're doing here in Canada. Okay, because of the heritage mashes, but it's usually the large corporations, the Wisers, going back trying stuff. And but for you, you're bringing back a specific mash bill. Michael's distilling it. Do you have a say in how it's being developed beyond that?
So the agreement I have with Boan is that they did exactly what I asked. And some of it was quite demanding. You know, they had to do it once with enzymes, once without, so we could track, you know, differences. They had to do each mash more than once, so that when we take the samples, you know, of course, you've got faints recycling and you're changing mash, there's theoretical contamination. Now it's you know, very, very, very small, but for academic purity, you know, they had to be done. So the samples that are being the samples that were sold off were all as one whole, but the stuff that's being put to a jury has to be, you know, there can be as no difference as possible. They have to be exactly, even if some mashes could yield higher results if treated differently, or if some of them, you know, if you took different cuts, you get more quantifiable, you know, no, they weren't allowed to take advantage of anything. It had to be exactly the same in all other respects: flow rate, fermentation, yeast, distillation regimen, cuts, everything. And so on the backside of this, then everything belongs to them. And what they did with it, the vast majority of it was sold off. So part of it, the bulk of it through a cask program, and then part of it through Michael himself, who stepped in and bought some of them from the company, with some sort of like West Kerry whip around among various friends and family members. I'm not quite sure where the money was got. But anyway, and a lot of the people who bought the cask were pubs, were whiskey societies, whiskey shops like Celtic Whiskey Shop, you know, which is very you know, old, venerable institution in Irish whiskey. And so I was quite happy with that approach to it. And also because, you know, when we have the panel, we're getting people from all over the industry, and I wanted to make it as explicit as possible that they're not just being suckered into doing Boan's, you know, research and development for them, that this information belongs to everybody. But yes, this mash bill regimen is in one specific frame. It's large bulb distills, triple distillation. It's essentially based on a kind of a heavy pot idea, you know, the bedrock of what we think of as Irish pot still, you know. But if you took these and superimposed them onto small stills or double distillation or whatever, you know, you create, or even different cut points within the same system. So this is only one, you know, but again, like any experiment, you have to be, you know, you have to keep your variables in line. So with that, the hope is that all of this, so I will actually be going to Edinburgh at the end of June. I got my first vaccination yesterday, and when I got the second, I'm allowed to fly, and will be heading off to Heriot Watt for the lab side of the thesis, which will be really, really fun. And the idea is that we take this lab information, and then when we have the sensory panel done, and my colleague Dr. Callum Holmes over there is contributing questions and so forth that will help them with their research, with their methodology, so that when they get those findings, say we find people making certain responses to the samples when they're given them, and they can say, well, look, there's these compounds arising as this comes up, and it's coming from the oats or it's coming from the wheat, and we see this response peaking and clustering. So I have no clue what a lot of this will look like, and I'm hugely indebted to them for my background's academically is entirely history. So I'd be rattling a baby's toy with more effectiveness than I would running through this stuff through a lab. But the hope is that when all this information is made available to people, that they can take it and then riff on it and say, well, okay, using this, well, if we put this through our kit, or if we, peated this, or if we did this, or if we did that, or if we malted these grains, whatever. And again, the potential is there for anyone to take this home and do with it as they please, and that's what I hope will come, is that history will, a big part of the and even the mash bills themselves, they're all decimalized. Whereas if you look at the historical records, they're on kind of, again, like oscillations based on how many sacks are in something on the day. So a few of them come from the same distillery, but they're just decimalized in two different directions, because we had to build a cohesive architecture to try and work out why these decisions were made. It's not just what they were, but it's been forgotten. Why on earth did people sprinkle in, 5% rye, especially in the low quantities? You wonder, what was the idea? Why were some distillers using 5% oats and some were using 30? And that's those people are all dead. So it's trying to recuperate not just the mashes but the logic, and then to take that logic and riff on it in a modern context.
So compare that to what they're doing with Killowen with Kilhowen. But you secretly despise him, and one night you come over to his house and pop him off. You are going to kill Owen. I will never do that, though. So, Killowen, they're doing with Bone, is it with Bone's kind of historical, traditional mash bills that you presented, or is it what they've done since the very beginning? I'm wondering if you have an effect in there whatsoever. They're divorced from, Brendan is on the panel with many other people, but like all panelists, he's not allowed to know anything before, and it's been very important to us to keep that information closed, because we want everyone walking in the room to be as blind as possible. Only for just data integrity. At night, we can then, tell everybody, as soon as they're done, we can tell them everything, big hoopla. But there has been, and I've had to kind of rein myself in the past, because before I was doing stuff with Bowen, I used to be quite loose-lipped. And on principle, loose-lipped. If people asked questions about history, I would tell them without charge, to try and get this stuff out there. And I think I've done enough talking that anyone who doesn't have their head in the sand knows vaguely what grains are involved in this, but that they won't know the proportions and whatnot. Killowen are certainly an odd bunch, but you see the things I was holding up before. So that's an example where you have that. First of all, the return to direct fire distillation, which of course is 9 kinds of cool, even on its own, and then coupling these mash bills with this direct flame, old worm coil condenser, really heavy stuff, and then peating, but using peated malt, but also peated oats. But then there's the malted oats and the raw oats at the same time, and and then they're messing about with bags of this and that. Killowen is a great example of a weird return to, again, almost like the mythology of the past rather than, the analysis of the past, if that makes sense. The stuff with the thesis is an attempt to analyze history, whereas this is, again, it's great. Killowen, it's really difficult to get to. They're in the middle of nowhere. It's a shed, basically. Ecklerville as well, another example. And Ecklerville get mentioned in that article. So I have some Ecklerville. So this is Irish Whiskey Society Ecklerville Spirit. So it's double distilled pot still. So Ecklerville were actually camera shy when that book was written, because they were actually setting up, and I emailed them, and they kind of said they weren't sure about going public just yet. And then they became very talkative afterwards, and I've had
conversations with them. But in their early years, they were already doing interesting stuff. And Ecklerville are a farm distillery. The closest parallel I think I say in that article is that they're a bit like Daft Mill, where farm distillery that have had an incredibly disciplined trigger finger, where they haven't put anything out, and people are waiting and waiting and waiting. Do you remember when everyone was waiting for Francis Cuthbert to put out a single malt? Man who was going to revive lowland distilling and all this. And of course that's out now. But the oldest Ecklerville Pot Still and malt is turning 8 this year. Still nothing out. They've been doing bonded stuff. Again, when I said some of the coolies with funny casts work and some of them don't, the ones that most certainly work, the ones of all of those tinted coolies, probably the ones that have received the most attention on auctions or in the fandom or whatever, are the Dunville's single casks. These 18, 19, 20-year-old coolies in exotic types of sherry, but even their normal 12-year-old coolie, and it's bewildering to me how that stuff is so good, and why there's a lot more of it. And again, that's already kind of gotten them a certain amount of infamy. But Ecklerville itself, they have no pot still out, but they do make both triple and double distilled pot still. And then they mix the mash 50-50 on some of them, or 70-30, playing around within that. And and then there's been talk of like Springbank like activity, mixing and matching. So they're even within malt and raw barley, they've been already quite experimental and strange. They have started to do stuff with oats in recreation. Actually, something came from the thesis. The Old Cumber Distillery, which is reviewed in Glass Apart, both the original one, the good one, and then the kind of horrendously over-oaked one that came up in the 80s, and the like dregs of the place. But anyway, I managed to find that mash bill in a record in the Public Records Office of Northern Ireland in Belfast. And that night I met up with Jarlath, and I forget who else was there, pal of mine, Jim Clark, in a bar in Belfast, and we're going to make 30 casts of this, blah blah blah. So they are attached in that sense, but really they were already doing really experimental stuff before. But I think I mentioned this particular spirit in that article, the double distilled Ecklerville Pot Still, and actually the one I did was the majority malt one, double distilled. Yeah. They used to do an even drier distillate that they now do only under request. They had triple distilled 50-50 malt and raw barley, and then they had double distilled 50-50, and then they had double distilled majority malt 70-30. And the double distilled majority malt is already very, very dry stuff. The 50-50 at double distillation it's like drinking chalk. And I loved it. It's so odd. It's, granular, dusty, strange stuff. You just put this in the right cask. Let the cask do the sweetening, and you're going to get this. It's like you're choking on a graham cracker. Anyway, so I'm on the committee for the Irish Whiskey Society that goes around and buys casks for the membership. And so we went up there and asked if they do it again, and they had these Palo Cortado sherry casks that they've been using to tint Dunvilles. We said, can we have one of those to age this in fully? Because we opened it up, and Palo Cortado sherry has that kind of like green apple-y thing, that pale weird, almost yeasty kind of smell, and that plus the chalk, that idea of like chalk and green apple, just made so much sense. So this, what I'm drinking now, is like 2-week-old that, because I had no patience. I went back in 2 weeks and said, just to see how it's getting on. Is it okay to make a terrible decision? But this is essentially new make. But Ecklerville, and it is that. I used to have this children's book called Stone Soup. Do you ever read Stone Soup?
Yes.
Yeah, and I used to wonder what stone soup would be like. And
that's it right there.
This is it. It's like the only sensation like this is like licking a cold rock as a child. It's so odd, and yet then it's got that again sweetness already coming in from the cask. So there's so much the real, and one of the reasons I don't intend to update a Glass Apart, probably ever, is that at the moment, there's a lot of new stuff, mostly new Middleton releases, and then some people releasing young stuff, but you just be chasing downwind. Either the book will get too big, or I'd be cutting out all the Middleton single casts that were in there and putting more mainstream stuff or whatever, and it would be irrelevant. It would be stillborn, it'd be gone, so I'd much rather just write another book entirely. But the time for that is, as the industry is just on the cusp of being worth writing another book about, where we have this avalanche just pending of new distilleries with their stock just hitting the right age, and again, that will look irrelevant in another 10 years, but it's exciting. I think a lot of the white noise around Irish whiskey is not really, it's kind of a red herring. The really exciting stuff is all happening behind, shed doors, and everyone's going to find out about it relatively soon. And it's really exciting,
Only if you're right about it, Fionnan. So I think you're the man to do it, or the person to do it. You, write that other book. We're waiting after the doctorate, of course. I did want to ask this question because in reading the article, was it the article or the book? They're blending together now. I got the sense of your time with Mary Byrne and Dr. Jim Swan. No, this would have been the book.
The book. Yeah.
I sense that was a big moment in your life. And big moments to me, something where you can remember just about everything of the situation. I had the impression that was a big moment for you. And I'm hoping it is, because I'd like to hear about that interview. Do you remember it very well? Is it a big moment? Something you're going to?
Yeah, and it's odd because there was the question raised, in the first print of the big print, the properly sized book. Another reason I revisited, just to make a balls of the reprint, they're mostly the same book with the small one has a few typos taken, fixed. And one page missing, which is the Dublin Whiskey Company, which ceased to. So the qualification for being in a glass apart at the time was, if you have stills, I'll talk to you, and that was it. So you can lose a lot of time talking to people who are just about to distill, and it never happened, and whatever. And I found that out very early on, and it's made life much easier for me, saying, look, can't wait. Let's talk when you have liquid flowing. But Dublin Whiskey Company actually did have stills. They hadn't been installed yet, but they did have them, and said, okay, that'll count. And the owners didn't get along or whatever, and they sold, and then the site was bought by, what's now the Dublin Liberties Distillery, which is a totally different entity to what they were. DLD is making malt whiskey, whereas what Jim was looking to do was pot still. But I did get to meet Jim Swan, who was a real hero of mine. Rest his soul.
Yeah, me too.
Odd now to think that, again, because of course he was instrumental in setting up the Harriet Watt, the Scotch Whisky Research Institute back in the day, and that's where we're doing the thesis stuff now. But I remember, and it was odd because talking to someone like Swan, and and again I knew him through like Compass Box and Kilhoman and Cavallan and all the cool stuff he was in before then, and I expected, a lot of time when you meet Scottish distillers, you kind of have to tell them about Irish whiskey. They might know a bit, but it's amazing how little a lot of really knowledgeable people in the Scotch industry know about Irish whiskey. But Jim wasn't like that at all. He and I remember walking him to the NCAD, the National College of Art and Design, which is the old Powers Distillery, and pointing at the stills, the old Brontosaurus shaped stills, which used to be quite common in Ireland, where you had the bulb and then the offset neck. And he goes, "Is that an offset neck? Blah blah. I haven't seen one of those in years." And he almost kind of teared up looking at a dead Irish distillery, and ended up at like 3 a.m. Myself, him, Marie Byrne, who was the project manager for that company at the time, or the owner. I forget who she was, a co-owner or something. She was the only co-owner I ever met. And Willie Murphy, again the aforementioned Will, propped up with a redbreast cast strength on an architectural, a building site, basically, a mill that was about to be converted, and drinking at 3 a.m. and talking about the history of pot still in the Liberties, and that entity ceased to exist. Of course, Jim has subsequently passed on, but it was certainly worth writing about a stillborn distillery just to hear that, or to have to get that time with him. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and he was such a gentleman. He's so soft spoke for a guy with that much knowledge and that much accomplishment and that much, you know, right to be austere. He was so warm and so, you know, the kind of guy, well, for many reasons you'd want to have a drink with, you know, but really, yeah. One of the
you've met several people like that I would like to have a drink with. And I get so envious when I'm reading the book. It's like, oh, okay, another person you're meeting, and another, and your whole days are set out with you talking to people about what they love. And that's one of my favorite things, talking to someone that's impassioned about what they do. And it could be anything. It could be someone that stuffs a pillow. And if their job was this and they knew nothing but that, they are impassioned. They know that's what I love. And you did that throughout this book. So it made me jealous. So I'm going to step back. I'm still jealous because I really, really would have liked to have met Jim Swan and just everything that he's done, every distillery and so many of them, and changed them so dramatically. Just him, not just him, but his influence.
Yeah.
Kent, Cheryl, and Dave, you guys, do you want to throw in a question here or there?
I got to ask something here. Page 181 of the book. I'm probably going to use this all the time. You commented, and it was what butter or whiskey will not cure cannot be cured.
Yeah, that's good.
Can you give us a Gaelic? Like, cause I couldn't read that, but
forgotten the Shanachal. Yeah. Hold on, because we have so the man whose name you were quoting earlier. Walsh or Welsh. His actual surname is Branagh, so make it out what you will. But Bihal is an actual Gaeilge native speaker, so I always feel awkward. But
we don't know any different.
Yeah, we're probably watching. So you know, fuck it. I won't say it right because I'll say it in my what's called Berlicus. You know, like Irish spoken by an Anglophone dub, and embarrass myself. So it's always difficult when you know people who are actually, you know,
judging you as they're listening
legitimate.
to you.
Well, people, yeah, but it is funny because, you know, butter itself, you know, there's a weird drink called Sculpting, and Sculpting is a mixture in its most basic form. Sculpting is a mixture of poaching and milk. But I've had it put to me by several people that the true Sculpting has a lump of butter in it, that you take, you know, illicit hooch and you literally drop a fatty cube of butter in it and add a bit of milk and give it a little swoosh. And but there is that weird, like, you know, whole fat whiskey. And a lot of like Irish pot still is quite oily, is quite mouthfilly. You know, a lot of the heritage stuff you see coming out is quite, you know, is quite physical. You know, I mean, the same way you look at what oats do to beer, you know, the kind of creaming effect. Wheat, of course, has its own kind of cream. But yeah, it's even that weird like relationship, and I don't think that's uniquely Irish, between spirits and medicine. The idea that, like, you know, something about it is going to cure something, which of course is not. It's like the brandy in the Alps. You know, the worst thing you can do to yourself in freezing conditions is drink alcohol. You know, it's a terrible, terrible idea, but you certainly feel like, you know, this is really helping. But yeah, again, there's a lot of these odd phrases floating about. There's one great distillery for poaching specifically that is branched out into whiskies, a crowd called Mickle out in Galway, and Padraig O'Greelish is another Gaeilgeoir. But I remember him talking to me once about, you know, how many words there were for peat. So you know, Mwina is the Scots Gaelic for peat, and Irish, you know, Mona. We have an organization called Board na Mona, which is, you know, literally the peat board, but it's the energy board because we don't use peat anymore. But literally the like gas and electric board is called, you know, peat board. But he was saying, well, you know, and as good Canadians, you probably know this is not actually true. The whole Eskimos having 100 words for snow is not actually correct. But in that vein, he was saying, oh yeah, there's about 100 words for turf Oscailica, you know, depending on whether it's like a wet lump or a heaped lump or recently cut or a kind of a this or that. And I've asked him a few times, can I have as many words as you can think of for Pete, with a little explanation. And I've yet, so maybe he was bluffing. Maybe there were like 6 words and he was just inflating it. But yeah, it's odd because, you know, a lot of the Irish language of the early 20th century, a lot of the acute vocabulary has disappeared, where you get, you know, like 20 words for a certain kind of kelp. So you look at these old dictionaries, these like reams of words. But one of them that came up, what was it? Oh God, I've forgotten. Anyway, the Bailty, that's it. Bailty, which was in the Donegal dialect, specifically from the Rosses at the time, when something called Dineen's dictionary was written in the early 20th century. There was this word Bailty that was specifically for oats used in poaching. And that always struck me, that there was this folk vocabulary, this untapped. Yeah, or like the old name for the head of a still was coach, maggot. And you think, well, maggot, geez, that's a really weird word. And, you know, of course, worm tub. It's the same, you know, same idea. And of course, they're both from the Latin for that thing is serpentum, the serpent. It's all from the same, you know, root ultimately. I can't remember what we were originally talking about. Anyway,
it was Dave's quote. You know what? I'm going to circle back to Dave and Cheryl and Kent, and I'm going to ask them for, in the whiskey world, please, author, distiller, owner, whatever it is. Who's your dream dram? Who do you want to sit down with and have one of those magical moments, those big moments where you're going to remember every part of it forever? And we're going to start with Kent or Cheryl, and then back to Dave. Dead or alive?
Jem McKinn.
Okay. And why?
We kind of came into the Scotch world living on his juice.
Yeah.
So he's kind of near and dear to us, going back to the beginning of our drinking days in whiskey. So yeah, he's
usually have his dram there. Usually have the Brookletty, the old Brookletty bottle that you've probably finished it by now.
Oh,
Cheryl, are you agreeing? Is that who you're doing?
Yeah. Honestly, yeah, because it was truly what brought us down this road that we've now taken. We just both fell in love with the juice, and then it's like you hear the story behind it and the people behind it, and yeah, it holds a place in our hearts for sure.
Excellent, thank you so much. That's a good one. Dave, do you have someone?
So yeah, this time I actually get to steal one of Kent's line. Kent took my line.
excellent.
And I'm going to say Jim McEwen, because I don't think he shows up his name comes up in so many of these conversations that we have. Doesn't matter who the author is. Jim's name comes up. So you keep hearing the guy's name and think, well, you need to talk to this guy.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I'd like to sit, like I'm doing now, sit and listen.
Yeah.
Well, just keep pouring them some dram one after the other, and just prompt them with a couple sentences here and there, and just have them talk.
And he's quite a character. Like, you watch his interviews, he's just hilarious to watch. I think he would be a riot. We got to get him on the show.
Okay. I've got that clout. Yeah. I'll bug him for 3 years in a row, and he'll just shut up. Though I'll go on one show, 15 minutes. Fionnan, I'm asking you, but I'm going to ask you someone that's dead, because if they're alive, you're most likely
guys in person next time. But I hope you're not dead.
No. Oh,
no. No. And I haven't told you my dream, and mine would be to visit you. And this is my reasoning, because my wife laughs at just about everything you say. I think she's secretly in love with you. She hasn't said that yet. And if I say I'm going to go to Ireland and we're going to go see Fionnan, I think she'll be in for it. It's like, yeah, let's go. Let's go. I'll pay for it right now.
You go, Laura.
I'm bugging her in the background. Sorry for that. As you expect.
No.
But I am going to ask you, if you're going to share a dram with someone who's dead, who would it be? Because I think if you have enough clout, I think that you can meet just about anybody now in the business. I think that's a fair statement. I think if you wanted to interview somebody for a book or whatever it was, I think they would be happy to talk to you. So that's why we're saying dead. Someone that's inaccessible to you, who would that be?
James Talbot Power, definitely.
Okay.
The
Why?
power, well, him or Andrew Jameson. The two people who stood up in 1908 with such a definitive idea of what Irish whiskey was and what Irish pot still was. So they're not the first, not like they're well down the line of Powers and Jemiesons, chronologically. I don't want to meet John Jameson, really. Well, good to meet all of them. But when you get to Andrew Jameson, you're talking about high era Dublin pot still, and I would love to sit down with them and talk with. But even more than them, I would love to talk to their distillers, because by that time the families were somewhat aloof to the running of the place, and I'd love to just meet some guy who chose the cuts in Powers at the time.
Okay.
And that's the person I really want to talk to, is the unremembered guy, or possibly like a couple of guys who were on the ground covered in soot, shoveling, what have you, grain into a silo. That definitely those would be the people I would really love to talk to.
Great. Okay.
Definitely.
That's a good answer, and a good historical or historian type of answer as well. I should have expected exactly something like that. That's it. That's all our time will give us. And Dave and Kent and Cheryl already said their last words. So Fionnan, because you didn't want to do it last time, any last words before we wrap this whole thing up?
Oh God, no. And I had an hour to think about it too. Yeah. Sorry about the tiny print. Anyone who had the Louis book,
Oh.
And we forgive you because you're mad at them for it, and not just teeny, gray as opposed to black.
Well, unfortunately, even the original, the press are primarily an architectural press, and my parents are architects, and I've seen architecture books before, and they're basically glorified picture books with like a little bit of gray text in the corner. So I think that was inherited even in the big one, the grayness and the not really meant to be read. And then the like King James edition, in the tiny font was a real, it took a lot out of me, unfortunately, because I did it and was kind of ignored.
Well, you didn't have fun with the second printing. How about us? You have fun with us on the panel?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Again, was it not too painful remembering or them not doing well?
This will probably be the last book top, as I think I said to you when we were talking about this, about that thing. But yeah, no, total fun.
Well, we love the book. And Dave, go ahead.
Can I say something before we sign off here? This has been an absolute pleasure being with Fionnan. I was a little concerned about the accent to begin with, but I understand you 100% now.
And he thinks we have an accent as well.
Yeah, and my accent isn't very strong. I have like a transatlantic accent. I'll introduce you to some people who will really get Brendan on next time. An accent.
One more comment before we go off the air is thanks to Dolph for this.
Yes.
Man, I've been riding in your coattails for like over a year now. This is a
year and a half now. We've been hanging on for dear life, and it's been quite a roller coaster.
And so much fun having everybody on and all of the authors. And Fionnan, you've been fantastic. I got to say, I've had a great 3 weeks, and I can't think of a better time. Even though he's angry with it, buy the book. He's angry with them, but it's a great book to have, and I think everyone should have this. And just read all the other articles that he puts out. That's important too, but I think you should read it.
FYI for everybody, it is also available on Google Play Books. A little bit easier to read on the tablet.
And
So-
beautiful pictures. So Dave and I likes it for
Yeah.
that reason. It's
Great.
It's a beautiful book.
So
Yeah,
one more
and
comment.
enough credit. The
One more comment.
So
Go ahead, Dave.
I want to say a big thanks to your production manager, Laura,
Aw.
Yeah.
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 for keeping us online there, and she worked hard today to get me actually to have my audio work. So
Well,
Thanks, Laura.
It's a pleasure having you on, and Laura loves having you there. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have. This has been a fantastic afternoon. Thank you to our listeners. Thank you to the panel, Dave, Cheryl, Kent, and it's been absolute pleasure spending all this time with y'all. And special thanks to Fionnan for writing this book in the first place, and especially coming on with us these last 3 weeks. I learned so much. Fantastic time in the process, and as an added plus, I was 6 bottles of Pot Still whiskey richer. Now I'm 8 bottles of Pot Still whiskey richer, and
it's like a bottle, a line of bottles behind the camera.
I have some there, but that's the Irish one pot still, but until they're cataloged, they're in the corner. So these ones are cataloged. All my new ones are not cataloged.
Okay, so,
Right.
you have
So
whiskey wealth and the
a
whiskey-
little explanation what's going on. I'm starting. What's that?
So
I said-
can we put a nomination forward to make Fionnan an Irish colonel?
Yes.
Yes, we could do that.
Yes.
I'll put that in your capable hands, Dave, and you'll do the paperwork. I'll sign something for you. That's good.
Yeah, okay.
All right. So this is what's
Story
happening.
from
I'm
another
starting
show.
my summer rotation. 2 weeks in 2 weeks. I'm starting my Canadian whiskey journey, where I and a few panel members from across Canada and these cats here spend time with 4 different distilleries every Saturday in June. It'll be loads of fun. Panel member or 2 will be broadcasting directly from the distillery, which will be fun because we haven't done that yet. Then in July, I'm doing the same thing, but I'm doing it remotely, called the International Whiskey Journey, and we're doing 9 international distilleries. Don Roscoe is going to come on with us every once in a while. I can't have him in there at the beginning because I have to control things, and you can't control Dom. Really. It's really, really hard to do it. So Dom's an after Dram thing for it, but when we control it with the
We
distillers,
love Dom, though.
that's what we're doing. And if you saw us last summer, it's much what we did with Davin Nicole and Blair Phillips with this book right here, the Definitive Guide to Canadian Distilleries. So it's the same thing. We're picking 9 distilleries. We're talking to the owners, and we're talking to the brand ambassadors or the managers and other people around. So that's it.
Robin as well.
Robin will come on for some. He said he would, but I haven't nailed him down for any dates. But we'll talk about it. Our next whiskey book club, though, will restart on Saturday, October 2nd, 2021. It's going to be 5:00 p.m. our time, 7:00 p.m. New York time or Eastern Standard Time. The Whiskey Masterclass, The Ultimate Guide to Understanding Scotch, Bourbon, Rye, and more. And that's, of course, with Lou Bryson. As a final note, if you don't want to miss a minute of any of our programs or these episodes, click like and subscribe. Time for the cheers, ladies and gentlemen. Here's the good company. Here's the good whiskey. Here's the good books. And here's to good conversation. Thank you all for everything. Swan.